Disclaimer: the content provided in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. While we discuss topics related to mental health advice, life wisdom, and alike, the opinions expressed are personal views of the hosts and do not constitute professional, legal, or medical advice. We make no representations or warranties about the accuracy or completeness of the information discussed. Any action you take based on the information in this podcast is strictly at your own risk, and we are not liable for any losses or damages in connection with its use. Additionally, this podcast may contain discussions around addictions, substances, which are intended for adult audiences. We do not endorse any illegal activities. Please consult your local laws before engaging in any actions related to this content. By listening to this podcast, you agree that you are over the age of 18 or the age of majority in your jurisdiction and understand the terms of this disclaimer.
Welcome to the Balancing Forces podcast, where two opposites collide in the best way possible. One brings the fire,
the other keeps it chill.
But together we share life's lessons, hard-earned wisdom,
advice you can actually use.
Whether you need a fresh perspective or just a laugh, we're here to elevate your mind. So buckle up, because things are about to get real and
really funny.
Are you ready to level up your astrology game? Join the Alchemist Laboratory by Solar Systems. For just $33 a month, you get access to 10+ courses, a resource library, manifestation secrets, live Q&As, and so much more. Over $2,300 in value. Transform your understanding of astrology and unlock hidden knowledge. Sign up now through the school app and follow Solar Systems on TikTok and Instagram.
Chapter 38. Motivation and your 22-year-old son or your 35-year-old self. I get a lot of kids coming to me, sometimes quite by accident, wondering what makes me tick, or sometimes simply overwhelmed by the unhappiness of their own lives. And for me, there is a very special excitement that comes from working with teens and kids in their early 20s, because there's a malleability, an openness, a receptivity to my message, and every teacher loves an eager student. More importantly, if I can change the self-perception and core beliefs of a young person, they have the chance of not wasting 10, 20, or more years living in deference to an external power source and external primary orientation point. In other words, the effect of changing the core beliefs of someone when they're young is that they begin living authentically sooner, thus enjoying far more happiness longer. Of course, to receive my message at a later age, rather than teens and 20s, often means that it's more likely to take root because an older person has tried many other paths in life and seen them come up empty. When older, our pain has gotten so bad that our hunger for a solution has also increased. Whereas a kid may see my messages as one among many and may not rely as heavily on it, often slipping into last man syndrome, simply taking the advice of the last person they talk to, particularly when it's an influential adult. Or the kid will resist me and what I bring to the table simply because they are convinced they know better, as we all did when we were 22. But more often than not, I end up working with teens and 20-somethings because it's their parents who brings them to me, wanting me to fix them. In other words, in the mind of the parent, the kid has a problem, or, to be fully accurate, is the problem. Therefore, in the mind of the parent, the solution requires changing the kid. NB. What follows is precisely the same concepts I use very often with 35 and 45-year-olds struggling, in particular, with career lethargy and unfulfillment. Interestingly, the 22-year-olds who cannot get started and the 36-year-olds who has accomplished much but is feeling dead in his career and life are suffering almost exactly the same spiritual malady. Your 22-year-old son. One of the patterns I have seen a great deal of in the last 10 years in particular is the lack of life motivation among males. It affects all ages, but particularly a great many under the age of 25 or 30. It's quite prevalent. Often they are college educated or in some other way successful, or at least appear to be on the surface, but their lives are drudgery. It is the drudgery and lack of motivation that vex both parent and child, and not just because they're living in mom and dad's basement, as there is no inherent crime in that, or an indicator of lack of motivation in that. Rather, it is that getting out of the house or scraping themselves up off the couch and starting life that requires a massive conjuring of energy every time. This is what perplexes both parties. To the external observer, read mom and dad, it's depression, lack of motivation, or laziness, not to mention the growing rebelliousness that usually accompanies it, as the young man feels judged and misunderstood. And so mom and dads bring the kids to me as if I'm some sort of boot camp that will tough love them into shape and get their lazy butts off the couch. But my work ends up being not at all what they expected, and in fact ends up being pretty much the opposite of what mom and dad want. The root matter. What I've found in my decades of spiritual work is that lack of motivation invariably boils down to three things, each of which is present to varying degrees in the unmotivated person. Fear. Always fear blocking the path, blocking the spirit. More often than not, the unmotivated person, regardless of age, knows exactly what they want beyond just some form of escape, but they are terrified of failing, terrified of disappointing all the critical voices, terrified of doing life on their own without support of others, such as mom and dad, terrified of showing the world who they really are and what really makes their hearts sing. One foot on the accelerator and one foot on the brake, revved up but utterly incapable of movement or sustained movement, or they're simply herky-jerky in their movements. What you say you want ain't what you really want. Some clients become so contorted by the primary power sources in their life that they can't hear their own voice, or they still so desire to win the praises of critical voices in their life, again, read mom and dad or family, that what they are doing is not authentic, i.e., originating in their truest inner voice, but is some derivative reaction to what others want or don't want from them. It is one of the first two paths, what is expected of me, the opposite of what expected of me, but not the third path, what is uniquely me, quite apart from the praise and criticism of others. They make stops and starts, or can never really seem to get going. The pressure to succeed keeps them from ever really starting or fully engaging, because they're often choosing paths for success, not for the love of the work of that particular path. And that 99 times out of 100 is the result of parental expectations and criticisms. Parents who don't realize that the only path a kid will ever get on and stay on is one on which he simply really enjoys the work or organization, quite apart from the successes or failures. Bottom line, they're not going after what they most want to be going after. The sheer weight of life. In one form or another, all lack of motivation comes down to this: that 500-pound bag of rocks they're carrying around on their backs, full of memories charged with highly negative emotions, keeps them from sustaining an effort or often even beginning one, even if they know exactly what they want to do, say, be, have, look like, feel like, or become. Sometimes life is just so heavy as to preclude any movement whatsoever. And the real tragedy of this particular situation is the lack of hope, particularly when the client is a mere 22. It's tragic. These are the clients who are so beaten down by life that they are ever on the lookout for both escapes and miracle cures. But again, the heaviness of the past plays in conjunction with the fear of hearing and dealing with critical voices of the present. Taken together, they are simply just too much to bear. As a result, many people become stuck in life, engaging in every manner of escape, each day losing belief that aliveness is ever possible. If you are unmotivated to go after what you want and you can't seem to figure out why, the reason for your lack of motivation is unequivocally one of two things. Either there are fears blocking the pursuit of what you want, or you don't really want what you say you want. The ugly part of this equation, at least for the anxious parent trying to fix their kid, is that the parent is often the very cause of the present situation, creating a love cup full of crud and or a gaping hole in the bottom. I am not a believer that any person can just get over their problems without assessing responsibility where it belongs. On those who pressed soul killing messages into the cement of the then child beliefs. Thus, when I volley the ball into the parent's court, they are often caught off balance and refuse to concede fault or accept responsibility, wanting to merely fix the kid rather than solve the real problem. Some parents simply pull out and pull their kids out. It is far too easy for the parent to keep the problem outside of themselves, i.e., on the kid, rather than even consider that they are part of the very problem they are trying to solve. Better to villainize someone else, even your own child, than to begin to look at the holy crap experience of realizing this was my own doing. Just as importantly, few parents realize that after about age 13, kids don't want to be fixed. They want to be heard. Those are two very different things. So the 22-year-old resists to ever increasing degrees. The unmotivated 22 or later 35 or 45-year-old is so because his voice has not been allowed to be heard. The kid's soul has no voice. He has been taught that his voice, his truth, and who he really is simply doesn't matter. He's terrified to speak and live his truth. Therefore, it's not that he lacks motivation per se. Instead, it is that he can't bear the thought of the parental and familial criticism, particularly when paired with the heaviness of the past. Yet, the solution at this age isn't just about changing the kid. Well, it is, but it isn't. Yes, I have to sell the kid on a message he is usually quite eager to hear spoken by someone other than himself, i.e., that his voice matters. The equally important solution, at least if the kid is still a minor or still dependent on the parent, is that the parent needs to begin to realize he or she is both part of the problem and part of the solution. Whatever serious depression or anxiety or screwed up behaviors are occurring in the kid's life are the direct result of the parent's actions, period. Parent and children both have responsibilities, but the parent created the situation. This comes as a very rude and unwanted awakening for many parents. The parent's inner fears keep saying, as long as I keep focusing on the kid as the problem, I'm safe. As long as I keep resisting any possibility of me being at fault, my own spirit won't get hurt. So they keep the focus and blame on the young adult, in no small part because that 22-year-old is an easy target. The parent still has sway over the young guy. He's still living under a powerful external power source, particularly if the external power source is housing and feeding him and not afraid to remind him of that fact. You can thus understand that the reason I sometimes dislike working with kids is because I'm not a fan of having to confront unsuspected parents with the often severe reality that even if they were great parents in many ways, they screwed up, as all parents do. They made mistakes. They sent destructive messages. The biggest challenge to the growth and happiness of a dependent kid is a parent unwilling to concede fault, accept responsibility for it, and acknowledge the validity of the kid's voice and autonomous aspirations. And while it'd be great to follow his truth with the approval and encouragement of the parent, the kid has to, in the end, learn and decide to believe in his own voice, believe in its value, and believe in its absolute necessity for that experience of aliveness and happiness. In the end, if the parent will not concede fault and grant permission to the adult child to live his own path, the 22 or 37-year-old must find and speak the resounding no rising up from his soul, longing for a voice. Absent that, he will forever live under the oppressive weight of fear and heavy rocks on his back. Are your values different? In this situation where a client has particular fondness for his parents, yet needs to find his no, I ask what is a rather dumb yet difficult question. Is it possible that your parents' values are different from your values? Dumb, obvious question, right? Surely no two people on earth have the same exact values in everything all the time, but it's so clear that a greater many people have never thought of it or thought of how their values differ from those of their parents. What specific values are different and why? And far more difficult in the case of an adult child who really loves or digs his or her parents is the simple act of admitting, I am not my parents. I am not identical to them. For this forces the adult child to give himself room to be different from his parents, and that's okay. Again, when we love our parents or hold them up as the epitome of good, the notion of differing from them is almost unthinkable. It is so obvious, but also not so obvious. So it's terribly obvious that you and your parents will have at least some different values, but it's not so obvious because even in loving homes, there can be a spoken or unspoken belief that there is only one good way, one acceptable set of values, or there may be a range of values, but they have to be in the ballpark of acceptability as determined by the primary power source in the home. For once you concede that it is even possible that your parents' values are not, in fact, your values, is it not then incumbent upon you to determine which are and which are not? Would not the quest for self discovery pass directly through the section of the dark forest marked the maze of values, mine and not mine? Once you concede that your parents' values may in fact not be yours, you then have to sit down and begin the task of writing out what you believe your parents' values are based on your 25 or 55-year history with them. You must then begin to really ponder and answer which of those are you, which of those you choose, which of those you reject, and which are cornerstones of your existence. Yet, the act of articulating how I'm different from my parents, even in some obvious ways, has the effect of cracking me open to the possibility that there might be bigger ways I'm different from them. More, it has the effect of giving myself permission to be different from them, whether in small or big ways. It gives my own inner voice permission to exist, be heard, and be followed, and when all my life I've been waiting for them, my external power sources, to give me permission. And once that hurdle is crossed with a client, it only then becomes an issue of digging down into the client and discerning what his or her real own values are, and then living out those values. But for many, the mere suggestion that they can have a voice that is different from their parents in any significant way is something that has never even really been considered. Or worse, the much more unthinkable notion is that he no longer needs their permission to live his life. He needs his own permission. Validating his own voice means that he can then extract mom and dad's voices and values from inside him, and extracting the voices of mom and dad never comes without consequences. This brings us right back to where we started the chapter, for those consequences are the real fears that inhibit most coveted action. It is the fear of criticism, the voices of the power sources, that is at the root of depression, anxiety, and inaction. The grand challenges to pushing through your lack of motivation is to 1. Acknowledge that your values are different from your mom and dad's and the other significant people in your life. 2. Delineate what their values are and where you deviate from them, i.e., what are your values are. 3. Summon the courage to stand up and say no to theirs and yes to your. Bite back at all fallouts that you know will come from doing so, or simply walking away from the fallout because you are under no obligation to stay and endure the criticisms anymore. 4. Boldly begin a life built on your values. It's going to be hard, at least at first, but it will also be exhilarating because it is the path of your liberation and your greatness. Journaling recommendation. 1. Many motivational writers and speakers ask the question, what would you do if you knew you could not fail? So write that at the top of your page and take some time to flesh out all of your answers in your career and personal life. 2. However I think the far more illuminating question is, what would you do even if you knew you would likely fail, or if there were a very high probability of not succeeding? In other words, what life path would you engage in if it weren't about the successes, but about the love of the work? See, this is the real question. This is the path that is going to hold your attention. No matter what path you take, you're going to have many failures, fall downs, and screw ups. And if you're only in it to have success, in the end, these failures will eventually blow out the flame of excitement. But if you love or believe in that work, the inevitable failures of life won't extinguish your zeal for the path. You might someday become even more interested in something else, but you'll not abandon your path simply because of hardships. 3. What are the paths you know with relative certainty that you do not want? What are you done with or over? What paths, tasks, work, settings, or what have yous are not you? Do you have the courage to no longer be them and pursue them? Song recommendation. I'm a big fan of this song. It's even on my workout mix. So inspiring, and it's good swift kick in the butt for kids and parents alike. Download the song and lyrics Something to Believe In by Parachute. So remember, we're giving away this signed autograph copy of There's a Hole in My Love Cup. To enter, just like, subscribe, and comment. Also, sign up for our Beacons link to get into the giveaway. Thank you very much for tuning in. Stay amazing, stay awesome, and remember always to keep it real.